Welcome to Ask Sean, where I explore all sorts of questions about life, relationships, and being human. I'm Sean Slevin, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And if you have a question for me, you can submit it anonymously at www.asksean.org. So a bit ago, I did one of my in-process videos, kind of my shorter and more informal videos on this question of why are men afraid of women. And it was really just exploring one little sliver of that, which I won't go into the particulars of that video here, although I'll see if I can put a little link to that up on the screen or something if you want to check that out first. But one of the things I reference in it, just as an aside, is just this idea of mother wounds, kind of the wounds that we have from our mother or mothers, if we had multiple mothers. And I've been percolating on this, wanting to do one or more videos on this, in part because I feel like it's maybe not talked about a whole lot. That's just my perception. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. I guess I feel like there's maybe more readily kind of the concept of a father wound. But just I think it's important, maybe particularly thinking about sons having wounds from their mothers. Maybe that's the angle in particular that I feel like maybe isn't talked about as much. And maybe one of the reasons, if that perception is even correct, maybe one of the reasons, this isn't maybe grappled with as much is that, we don't want to feel like we're bashing mothers, because that's not cool. Motherhood is this wonderful, impossible endeavor. And there's already so many kind of cultural pressures and logistical pressures on mothers. And also I think there's just an instinctive, awareness of this person brought us into the world, if we were biologically born from our mother, the mother that raised us. But somebody, a mother, a woman gave birth to us, grew us in their womb and gave birth to us. And that's such a holy, sacred thing that feels like, gosh, how can we have any complaint when you literally gave me life? So I guess I want to say a couple things here at the outset about this. I mean, the point here is not to bash mothers or fathers. All parents do the best that they can with what they've got. And all parents fail. Even the best parents, even the most prepared, the most educated, had the most therapy, whatever, are going to fail. And that's just the nature of life. So if you're a mother watching this, the point of this video is not to bash you or to shame you. It is probably going to bring up things that are going to be hard to hear. You may have to pause it periodically to care for yourself, to ground yourself, especially if a lot of shame is coming up. You need to deal with that shame. Because the thing is, we need to be able to, we all, men and women, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, we need to be able to grapple with the ways that we have maybe failed. We need to be able to face that and own that without shame. We need to do that for ourselves so that we can accept ourselves and love ourselves, especially in our imperfections. Have compassion on ourselves and come to some understanding of why did I fail in these particular ways. And for the sake of relationships, if you're a mother who has a son or a daughter, for that matter. I mean, a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about really can apply to either, although I want to play in particular with and kind of tease out, I think, some nuances, and just sort of dynamics for boys and men. But yeah, for the sake of your relationship with your child or children, being able to make peace with your mistakes, with your failures is, oh man, what a huge gift. I mean, when a parent is able to tolerate their badness, if you will, without shame, be able to hold space for that, not get defensive, not be overwhelmed by that, to be able to hold space for their child's complaint, disappointment, hurt, pain, trauma. When a parent does the hard work of being able to do that, hold that kind of space, then like so much repair and healing can happen. That can be such an immense gift. So you may be in any point on a spectrum there. You might be just at the beginnings of your journey of working towards healing and facing some mistakes, and so you have happened upon this video somehow, or maybe someone sent it to you, and so yeah, this is hard work. This is in some ways it feels like impossibly hard work, to face our mistakes, but it is doable, and you have value. This is the thing. Mother, father, son, daughter, we have all failed one another, and we still have value. We still matter. Now that doesn't necessarily feel true to our insides. That's part of the healing work we have to do, part of the work of learning how to push back against shame. But I want to lay out here at the outset, the point here is not to bash parents. It's not to make parents into a scapegoat. It's not to make parents, and since we're talking particularly about mothers, it's not to make mothers responsible for our failures as adults. So this is an interesting thing, so I'm speaking now to men, although again, this would apply, a lot of these things will apply to women too. But yes, thinking in particular about men, you need to be able to face the ways in which your parents hurt you and failed you, the ways in which your mother or mothers hurt you and failed you. And that is not that's not an excuse for our bad behavior in adulthood. The reason we need to be able to face these things is, number one, we need to be able to deal with the pain. Because if we're not dealing with the pain, we're not going to be able to heal and change. And we need to be able to have compassion. We need to grow some compassion for ourselves. And here's why I struggle in these particular ways, that I still need to work on, because whatever ways I'm misbehaving in the present as an adult. And we need to labor towards compassion for our mother and for all mothers. For what a immense, noble, difficult calling it is to be a mother. The impossibility of it. We need to be able to forgive. And we need to grapple with what does potential reconciliation look like, because those are two separate things. So yeah, it's, I guess, wanting to kind of give these initial caveats, because it can be easy. I think, this kind of conversation is fraught in so many ways. It's easy to fall off the side of a cliff in a number of different ways, and I'm only naming a few here. But yeah, I think that men, we can err on the side of not acknowledging that we've been hurt at all, and that our mothers have hurt us. And we can err on the side of blaming our mothers for our current behavior. Well, I'm being a jackass now because my mom did this, that, or the other, or failed to do this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, no, I'm responsible for how I behave now. The wounds that I carry are relevant, and it can be appropriate to reference them, of like, I'm really struggling with this childhood wound right now, and how I just treated you is not okay. Like, so we have to take responsibility. And that's really, I mean, that's kind of, the theme on both sides, right? Like, whether mother or son, we have to take responsibility. We have to do the hard work of facing our shame and embracing our grief and forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, so that we might become more whole, and so that we can change how we are living right now. We can't change the past. We can change our relationship to the past. We can change our relationship to those wounds. And changing our relationship to those wounds and helping them heal is what is going to enable us to change how we're living now. And so the places where we're misbehaving now, where we're treating others poorly now, we change that by facing and working through the past. So lots of caveats. But yeah, I just wanting to at least head off some of the ways, depending on who you are and where you're coming from in your journey, that you may be tempted to kind of go someplace with, the things we're talking about here that I'm not intending for you to. So, thinking about mother wounds. I think I'm just going to hone in on one, and maybe even just sort of part of one. Thinking about this idea, this theme, this thread for us to kind of tug at a bit today of when mothers need their sons to be strong. And I want to put strong in quotes because I mean something in particular by that. And I think I mean the word need as well. Mothers needing their sons to be strong, because that kind of further hones in on a particular dynamic here. So maybe let me say a little bit about what do I mean by strong in quotes. Little bunny ears. Really, I would think about this as toughness. And, I'm not wed to how I'm using these words, but this is the way that I'm going to try to be consistent. I'm really trying to delineate between what I would call a healthy strength and kind of like an unhealthy toughness. So you could use other words to try to get at this delineation, but these are the ones that I tend to use. So I tend to use strong in a more positive way, and toughness in I guess more of a negative way, a less positive way. But when mothers are needing their sons to be strong, they're thinking about it in terms of what they would define as strength, or what we might culturally define as strength, but really what I would define as more of a toughness. And so this distinction, how much do I want to say now? I mean, part of the thing, when I think about toughness doesn't hold space for weakness. It doesn't hold space typically very well for compassion, for empathy. It involves sort of a subverting of one's own needs and vulnerabilities. And this happens for women too. I've had many women I've encountered, and both as clients and in life, who clearly were taught to be tough, but would have been framed as being strong. And in the process, they've neglected their own hearts. But there's other ways also, that, that can look like in terms of neglecting one's own heart. But I'm thinking here about, this toughness of like, you need to be strong, you need to be tough, don't be weak, be solid, be a rock. This is some of the language we use culturally, right? For men are supposed to be solid, be be the rock for the woman, or for their partner. Be unshakable. Don't be too emotional. I mean, our culture has shifted a lot in some good ways, but it's remarkable how much these things still persist. They still, I don't know, there's something interesting there about human nature, or maybe just some deeply entrenched cultural things, but that we continue to put these things on one another in different ways. So thinking about a couple of angles here, right? Like there's I just lost my thought. There was two things I wanted to say. I guess what I'm wanting to kind of hone in particular is this one facet where a mother, out of her own needfulness, is needing her son to to kind of be that sort of rock for her, to be that stability for her. And so I kind of want to explore a little bit about like some of why that might happen, and then we'll explore some of what are the implications of that. So, kind of the obvious initial thought is, well, a mother might go to her son in this way, one or more of her sons in this way, because her husband isn't being this for her. So, okay, yeah, I mean, that's a common thing. I see that happen a lot. But that doesn't really answer our question. Like, I guess I'm wanting to challenge this idea that we're supposed to be this for one another at all. I think there's a kernel of truth here in that, like, as humans, we are meant to learn how to be alongside each other and to support each other. But there's this caricature, sort of this oversimplification that tends to be gendered. Though there's there's a female gendered version of this, right? Or women are supposed to be able to handle anything. Mothers are supposed to be able to handle anything. So we're already starting to kind of even hint a little bit here at, like, how does this kind of thing happen? It's like, so we don't know where. It doesn't matter where where the mess starts. It starts somewhere, and then once it gets going, it just wants to perpetuate culturally and through family systems and through generations. But somehow along the way, somebody didn't have enough of what they needed, and there wasn't the space. There wasn't anybody with the capacity emotionally to be able to say, hey, I know that you don't have what you need, and that's not okay. And so when we don't have that, when we have a lack and we have no acknowledgement of the lack, no honoring of the lack, we have to compensate for that somehow. And one of the ways is we become tough. We just try to kind of bear everything, or we subvert it in a different way where we become so we can go one direction or the other. We can, and I guess this is the two things I was thinking about. So a mother might be tough herself, or so she's subverted her needs in this kind of way when she's a little bit kind of hard and crusty, and in that sense kind of resembling sort of a typical unhealthy guy, honestly. But the other version of this is where she goes to the other extreme, where she becomes overly weak, we might say. Now, weakness is not our enemy, and so this is tricky to talk about, but I want to talk about sort of an unhealthy relationship to weakness, and so this is where the needing the son to be tough really particularly shows up, where a mother, like, she still actually isn't able to be in healthy relationship with her own vulnerability, her own needfulness, her own weakness. And so instead kind of goes to kind of a bit of a powerless kind of place. Now, as I say that, I'm having all sorts of thoughts about all the ways in which there's cultural dynamics, patriarchy and whatnot that play into that. And all of that matters and is relevant. I think I'm not going to take that digression at the moment because that could easily become its own video. And I don't want to miss. So here's the thing: there's always going to be shit like that, no matter how much culture changes and heals and shifts and whatever. There's always something. There's always junk that we have been born into, our moment in history. And so here's the thing: we got to grapple with. Here's the cards I was dealt. What do I do with that? Like that's kind of what I was getting at earlier in terms of taking responsibility, whether we're the mother, whether we're the son. We gotta take responsibility. We gotta have compassion, which is part of that, taking responsibility. So yeah, there can be all sorts of reasons, right? Where certainly cultural is part of that. There's all sorts of different family background scenarios, where a mother is coming to motherhood, and isn't able to access, doesn't have enough internal muscles of being able to acknowledge I have certain needs, and those needs matter even if I'm not able to meet all of them, or the people around me aren't able to meet all of them. And so yeah, then you have this sort of almost an exaggeration of weakness, because we all have weakness, right? That then is like needing the son, the husband, if there is a husband, or partner, of whatever gender, needing the partner to somehow compensate, I mean, this takes us into, some of the classic, honestly, dynamic of, someone looking to be rescued, kind of thing. And I think, one of the reasons that this is an appealing survival strategy, not that we're conscious of it when we're doing it initially, but it avoids the vulnerability of, there are things that I want and need that I may not be able to bring about. Like that's a really, really hard thing to sit with. And so shifting that responsibility unconsciously onto someone else, even onto one's child, it makes it a little more bearable. It doesn't really work. It's not a good plan. It doesn't actually help us if we're the mother. But it's understandable, And this is, again, part of the, need to have compassion. If you're a mother listening to this, like, there are all sorts of reasons, that could be each of them, its own video I could do, right, on how you've ended up kind of coping and surviving in these ways. And add to this the fact that motherhood is so freaking overwhelming in and of itself that children, just by virtue of being children, need way more than a mother can give, way more than a mother and father can give. I mean, just as an aside, I think this is one of the deep tragedies of how American culture has become so localized around the nuclear family. I mean, it's sort of ironic to call it the nuclear family because it feels kind of combustible to me. And my point is just that, I mean, you've maybe heard the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. I mean, it takes a village to raise a family. It takes a village to raise a marriage. Like we need so much more interconnectedness than we tend to have in American culture. And so, like, mothers and fathers both are, like, starting from way behind the eight ball at something that's already impossible. I mean, parenting is kind of impossible. It's important. It's worth doing. But, like, children are always going to need more than parents can give. And it's like, And then to be doing that largely in isolation, not having an extended network of family and community members, and people that are like officially aunts and uncles and grandparents, and people who are unofficially aunts and uncles and grandparents, but function in those ways. Like we've really lost the benefits of the tribe. And granted, there's weakness to the tribe too, and there's brokenness to that too. So it's like there's no perfect thing, right? But I'm just wanting to acknowledge this is such a difficult task, trying to mother. So you have this dynamic where a mother is needing their child, needing their son to be strong, to be tough, needing him to be competent, potentially to compensate for weak areas. This could look like the son who takes care of time responsibilities because their mother isn't able to own that and own their struggles around time, or maybe finances. Maybe the son parents their siblings some. This can be, some of this can even take the form of, this is a little bit more nuanced. You would maybe automatically think of this as toughness, but like the form of the son has to be the confidant of the mother. So he's having to be tough in that way, and that he's having to set aside his own needs for a mother in order to take care of her emotional needs, or try to take care of. These are, again, it's like a mother who is behaving in these ways is not trying to be evil. She's just trying to survive. She's trying to survive her own deprivation. If you are a mother and you're resonating with this, like you've been just trying to survive. And you do need to be able to acknowledge that this is not a good way to parent. Like your child can't be these things for you. They're just a kid. No matter how capable they seem, they need you to find other resources, other people, counselors, religious leaders if you're in a religious tradition, mentors, family members if you have healthy family members. Like you need to have people that you go to who can minister to you, friends, peers. Like your child, your son or daughter can't be this for you. They can't be your best friend. They can't be your confidant. They can't compensate for kind of the weaknesses that you're not able to own and take responsibility for. And if you're putting those things onto them, though it's understandable, you're really wounding them. You're probably traumatizing them in some ways. And you're perpetuating onto them some of what was probably done to you. And that's a deep grief. And that may bring up a lot of shame, and you need to face and deal with that shame. Shame is not telling the truth about who you are. We do need to feel guilty about our mistakes and our failures and our shortcomings, but shame tries to say that we're a horrible person, and you're not a horrible person. You're a good person. And you want to love your kids, and you do love your kids, and you're trying to do the best you can. And if you're a son listening to this, you need to hear my tender heart, my compassion, like for your mother who has hurt you, who has failed you. And you may need to be angry at her for a while. You may have a lot of anger and rage that you need to own and face. But you need to not let that be the destination or the end of the story, because that just becomes bitterness, and that will not help you as a son of any age. Because here, let's just kind of like now think about like how does this play out? So say you've been a son who's been raised in some of these kinds of dynamics. Your mom has needed you to be tough, needed you to subvert your own emotional needs for mothering, for being mothered, in order to be her rock, in order to be her emotional confidant, in order to compensate for areas of weakness that she's not able to own and take responsibility for. So there's different ways that this then may play out in your adulthood as a man. You, depending on the facets, the flavor of things that you experienced, you may be prone to taking on caretaking roles. So this really plays in right to that cultural stereotype of the man's supposed to find a woman to rescue, kind of thing. So this sets you up really well for that, right? Which on the surface can be like, oh, what's wrong with that? Well, I'll try to unpack that a little bit. What's problematic about that? And I touch on that in other videos too. You can check out on my channel. I was going to say something and I lost it. So I guess another facet of this is, so even if you're going sort of that caretaking route, or a number of these other routes, like you haven't learned how to relate to the feminine terribly healthily, because you've kind of been taught that inadvertently, again, not trying to pick on your mom, not trying to pick on mothers, but what you were taught is that you're not actually going to get, depending on the flavor here, you're potentially taught you're not going to get compassion. You need to be the solid one. So if you're scared or you're feeling weak, or you don't know what to do with your emotions, you kind of have to swallow those. You also may be part of what, kind of functionally what you internalized is you may not have much respect for women, which is very unfortunate and is not a place to stay, because you need to be able to respect all people, men and women. And you need to be able to have respect for your mother, even though she's failed you in whatever ways. There may even be a contempt there, depending on sort of how some of that dynamic played out. There may be a kind of a bitterness and a contempt and a disgust, and kind of this plays into some of these really toxic cultural sort of stereotypes of where men will be like, well, women, they just can't blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, that's a total generalization. It's an exaggeration, and it's not true. You may have had particular experiences of a female who has struggled in certain ways. And here's the thing: if you have so much contempt for that, it belies a couple things. One, you've got a lot of pain around that, about how that impacted you, but you also probably aren't able to have compassion for yourself and how you might struggle in those same areas. And you might think, oh, but I don't, because I'm whatever, super competent, and da-da-da-da. It's like, well, that may be, but I have found that the things that we can be most disrespectful about, most contemptuous about, there's often ways that we fail similarly, if we're willing to look. Trying to remember my next thought that was forming, and then it's evaporated. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, and again, I mean, we're tugging at I'm trying to follow sort of a central thread, but there's so many connecting threads. So it's like there's so many pieces we could pick up on, and we could spend hours on. So if you're hearing this and you're like, I relate to that piece and I want to hear more about that, send in a question. I would be happy to hone in on a piece that really relates to you in particular. But I guess the thing, maybe the final thing, we'll see. A thing I wanted to be sure to touch on though is, where do men tend to then go with their emotional needs that these kinds of mother wounds taught them? Well, I can't directly get them or address them through a relationship with a female. Because, again, in these kinds of dynamics, you didn't get to experience that you could have certain emotional needs and that your mother would be like, oh, let me, I'm sorry, sweetie, let me be here with you. And here's the tricky thing. We need, in terms of mothering, we need support and we need comfort, but we also need our mothers to be able to tolerate, our being in pain. We don't need our mothers to take away remove all struggle. That's a different dynamic. That would be an interesting one to do a video on too, is what happens when we're spoiled. When our mother rescues us, when our mother doesn't let us fail. That's its own wound. That can really, in its own way, really mess a man up in his adulthood. So that is way too much to try to get into in this video, which I'm sure is going to be plenty long on its own. But a common thing, and honestly for a lot of different wounds, because a number of wounds that men are prone to or tend to receive in our culture, involve these ways in which we didn't get to really have a full sort of kind of emotional world in relationship to our parents. So we had to, maybe we're told not to cry, kind of thing, or again, the be strong, to be tough. Maybe there's just so much need exuded from our parents that it's just, we didn't even get to the point of being like, hey, I have some needs too. It's just, we're just always caring for them, taking care of them in some kind of way, or compensating, So then typically what happens, because additionally, right, culturally, men aren't socialized to be in touch with their emotions very well, or to talk with one another about their emotions very well. And so what men tend to do is we tend to then try to address this broad, deep area of emotional complexity. Gets all put into one little basket called sex. And that gets really problematic in all sorts of ways. Now that, I haven't quite decided how much I'm going to say about that in this video, because that could easily be its own video. But I at least wanted to touch on that this is one of the big This is one of the things that falls out of this. Fallouts. Now I've done the thing where I've said it enough times it sounds weird in my head. Any rate, okay. This is the one of the big results. That was another word I'm looking for that I can't think of. Is men's relationship to sex. And so this relational and physiological experience that is meant to be deeply bonding and is meant to be in the context of established intimacy and trust and safety becomes, a lot of times for a lot of men, the only way that they even barely scratch their psychological needs. I kind of want to say spiritual too. I kind of want to put those together here. Psychological and spiritual needs for grappling with vulnerability, weakness, intimacy, all these complexity of emotions. And that is like that sex can't hold all of that, right? And this is why it can then go weird or destructive, frankly, in so many different ways. Because for sex to be healthy, both parties have to be grounded enough to be able to sit with the vulnerability of like being exposed to one another, and not need to go to some sort of yucky power dynamic, for example, or using, anger. Like that gets yucky and dangerous, right? Like if you're having to use anger in the context of sex in order to like make yourself feel safe enough, like that's not okay. The wounds that are underneath that, those need addressing. Those are really important. So the drive towards sex is telling you something, but sex isn't the answer. Like you have to learn how to like move towards those places of deep vulnerability and weakness. And probably the little boy that is still back in childhood, like needing mothering in certain ways, and fathering of course as well, but we're talking particularly about mother-son relationship dynamics here, and who's scared, who's ashamed, who's confused. Like that little boy needs you. He needs you to find a mentor who can help you learn how to be with him. Like you can't resolve this, you can't work this out through sex. I can't tell you how many times. I mean, it's just such a. I mean, it seems cliche-ish, but it's just very common, where guys will be like, well, if she would just have sex with me more, then things would be fine. It's like, yeah, that doesn't solve things. Like, and certainly I want for couples to have a good, vibrant, frequent sex life. But if it is coming from that really intense need place, it's like, well, we need to address what's going on with that need, because you actually will not die without sex. We need connection, we need intimacy, we need vulnerability with each other. Those are things that like humans will wither without connection. I mean, I think about I've probably referenced this before, but after one of the world wars, when there was like all these orphans and orphanages, and the infants that were not getting held but were still fed, like they died. They were we call this failing to thrive, is sort of the technical term, because they weren't getting any connection. They were literally dying without connection, even though they had nourishment, they had warmth. They weren't dying in that sense of like a physiological need. They're dying of like a neurological, relational need, to be attended to be seen. So yeah, so freaking much more that could be said here, but I wanted to at least start the conversation, and I hope that this can stir up some stuff for you, whether as a mother or as a son. Maybe there's parts of this that made you angry, so pay attention to that. What about it made you angry? If there's parts that brought up shame, okay, you need to learn how to be in relationship with that, different relationship to that shame, so the shame isn't beating you up. It's like we have to be able to like have boundaries with our shame, so we can set some space of like, this does not make me a bad person, but I may have failed in this way, or I may be failing in this way. If you're a son, you're an adult male, and you're using sex, whether that's in a committed relationship or not, you're using sex as a way of avoiding dealing with how scared parts of you are, how lonely parts of you are, how confused about your emotions that you are. Like, you need to actually turn towards those places, turn towards those emotions. You need to seek out somebody who can help you start to do that. And let me tell you, it is never too late. I have clients, gosh, I want to say definitely in the 60s and I think in the 70s, who have started therapy for the first time in their life, and they've stuck with it, and they are doing hard work, and they are changing, and they're learning to, men and women both, and they're learning to be able to like figure out some of what they're feeling. They're learning to be able to like work with their feelings, like all these things that have been off limits and just, kind of like buried and like, coping with in all sorts of unhealthy ways. So it is never too late. And like I talked about in another of my in-process videos recently, like the repetition of something, like we can change, we can grow and change. Like if we stick with it, if we keep working at it and working at it and working at it and working at it. So yeah, I hope that you can have compassion on yourself, whether you're a mother or a son. And I hope in some ways this maybe lights a little bit of a healthy fire under you to turn towards some places that you're needing to turn towards. Not out of shame, but because those parts of you that are hurting, they deserve healing. Like, don't leave them abandoned, back in the past. Like give them a chance to have a better future. And there's so many other ways as a man that you may be acting out, unhealthily in response to childhood mother wounds. I mean, I just touched on a few things. The anger piece can be really big, really common. Kind of a judginess, a contempt, a looking down upon women, those kinds of things. But again, I hope you're starting to kind of catch the theme of like underneath of that, you're scared. Not actually of women. You're scared of being hurt. Because you were hurt before, you were hurt in childhood, and you haven't faced that. And the point here is not to blame your mom or mothers if you had multiple mothers, but that you gotta be honest about what you're carrying. You gotta do the hard work of helping it heal. You can't just pass that off onto somebody else, because that is just doing a form of what was done to you, right? So if you are in a place where you're like super pissed at your mom, maybe you're watching this video because you've already been recognizing like ways that your mom wasn't able to be there for you, and you're feeling really judgy of her and contemptful and whatnot. If you stay in that place, if you choose to just stay in that bitterness, then you're just doing a different version, like you're failing to take responsibility in ways that she failed to. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make her a bad person. But I'm telling you now, and I'm shining a light on it, and so you're more accountable. And even when we don't know, we still have accountability. We still have responsibility. But even more so when someone says, "Hey, it's not okay to do that." So I know it's scary. It's scary. It's hard. It feels impossible. But it is worth it. It is so worth it, and you are worth it. And your relationships are worth it. Well, until next time, peace be with you.